Hi everyone, and welcome to a new story time. I'm very, very excited for this story. It's called A Storyteller's Journey, The Life and Death of an Endless War. So this particular story, I think I want to start doing in a little series. In the sense of it's still going to be during my story time series, it's still going to happen during my Twitch streams where I record these and that sort of thing. But I think I want to expand this world. In the story at the very beginning, I say that I'm a storyteller because I am. And I want to expand upon that, and I want to use that to have an entire storytelling world. You'll understand a little bit more as the story goes, but I think I want to make this particular story style, this vibe, into a series within this series, if that makes sense, where you don't have to have heard the previous ones or anything. All of the stories are always going to be standalone. However, I want this particular grouping of stories to be within one world. So if you watch them all, if you listen to them all, that sort of thing, you're going to get a more full picture than if you were to just do one of them. But just one of them still gives you a full story. But anyway, please enjoy. I'm really excited for this one. It was a lot different than I was originally expecting when I first started telling the story. I didn't know what I was doing. But now I'm actually really, really happy with how it turned out. Enjoy. So, I know we said fantasy, right? But, little do you guys know, I travel worlds. It's a thing. I am one of those, I'm a storyteller, I've been to so many different types of worlds. And some of them stick out a little bit more than others, as they do, right? So we are actually, there was this world that I went to one time, and I wasn't the biggest fan of it at first, okay? And you gotta understand, I like a lot of worlds that I go to. A lot of them are a lot of fun. They're very, just each world that I've been to has its own thing that makes me appreciate it, that makes me enjoy being there and that sort of thing. Even this world had its appeals. But the biggest thing was just the fact that there was always a war going on. There's always a war happening in this world, which makes it not fun. It's not fun to go to a place that's constantly fighting, that's constantly at war, and just never having a good time. Everybody's constantly at war. There's almost never this peaceful area. And so I didn't like that world for that reason. However, one of the times when I was passing through, I was just trying to get from one world to the next, and I had to pass through this one to do so. I stumbled upon this, so I was taking a way through the woods because I found that in that particular world, the woods are a lot safer. It's a lot easier to explore. It's a lot easier to just get away and avoid the war by traveling through the woods. And this is because typically there's monsters in the woods, big scary monsters throughout the woods, right? And so I was taking the woods because I know how to handle myself. I know how to deal with the big scary things in the woods. And so that's what I was gonna do. I was just going to deal with that. Nope, that's the wrong song. There we go. So I traveled through the woods, and as I was traveling, I stumbled upon this clearing. And in this clearing, it was beautiful. The trees seemed to like bend around it and create just like this like pocket. You could see up into the sky, but it was almost like there was a protective like layer of leaves that kept it from being found, like if you were in the sky or something like that. Like it kept it safe. And as soon as you stepped out from the woods and into the clearing, there was this overwhelming just like air about it. It smelt of like rain, like the smell of rain and freshly cut grass. It was all of my favorite smells all mixed in together, but not overwhelming. It was that in a very like comforting way. As you stepped through, there was like the air was just slightly warmer. Once again, not an uncomfortable warm, but just like I was getting a close hug. It was like I was getting a big hug. And in the center there was a little pond. And like I said, there was like almost like a canopy over the top, right? Like a layer of leaves that kept things from getting in. But what it didn't do was it didn't block the sun that much. And there were spots of sunlight that were peeking down and hitting this pond and creating this like glimmer and glisten along the like top. And it sparkled, and it was very like, there was a pull to it. There was something saying come closer. There was something saying relax, to take a load off, to just take a break. And so I did. So I went over and I laid down next to this pond and I fell asleep. And when I woke, there was a little fish at the edge of the pond sticking its little head out. And I looked at him and I said, well, hello there. You know, not expecting a response. From what I'd seen of this world, it was run by essentially humans, you know. They weren't humans, they didn't call themselves humans, but they were the equivalent of humans. If we were to compare it to this world. But they were their own species, they were their own thing, but just for ease and simplicity of explanation, they were humans. And I was not expecting a response from this fish, so when it looked up at me and said, well, hello there. It's very nice to meet you. I was quite taken aback, and I think, you know, I was quite taken aback. I've seen a lot in my travels, but having a fish talk to me? That one was kinda new. And I looked down at the little fish and I said, why, hello. My name is Tay. It is lovely to meet you. The fish looked up at me and said, my name is Bartholomew Winston. And I take care of these woods. I am in charge of caring for the woods and keeping the war outside. And I smiled down at him. I said, well, thank you, because these woods are magnificent. I've seen a few deer and some squirrels, and even it was a skunk. I did stay away because at least where I'm from, skunk are not very friendly, but I almost had this feeling as if it was. As if this particular skunk would be so nice. And Bartholomew smiled and said, oh yes, all of the creatures in these woods are quite nice. They will cause no harm if you cause no harm to them. He goes, except... No, I won't trouble you with it. Looked confused because he just said that all of the creatures were kind, and I went, well, what creature isn't? Which one? So that well, I don't want to approach the wrong creature. But I love making friends and I love hearing stories, and I would love to talk with all of the animals in this forest, to hear about their lives, to hear their stories. And Bartholomew shakes his head and he just goes, "You travel across worlds. Even I can see this. It might be best to just leave this particular world behind." And of course this would confuse me because, well, I don't know if you've ever seen Doctor Who, but I don't remember which doctor, but I do remember one of the doctors saying, "In all my years, I've never met someone insignificant or unimportant," or something like that. And that same vibe goes for worlds. It's uncommon. It's non-existent for a world to be unimportant, for the stories that it has to tell to be unimportant. Even this world that's full of war and hatred and destruction, there's still a story to tell. There's still a lesson to learn. There's still something here. And I told this to Bartholomew. And he shook his head and he said, "But you don't want to hear all of the stories." And I said, "Well, that's the thing is I was talking to him and it was a feeling of, no, maybe I don't want to know this story, but deep down I knew I needed to know it. Because how could I be a good storyteller if the only stories I told were happy ones? If there was no conflict, what sort of story could there be? It's you have to take the good with the bad, because how do you know about the good if you don't have any bad to compare it to? If good things were the only things that ever happened to people, then we would never know how good it really is. We would never be able to fully appreciate it. And the same thing goes for stories. Is if you just have the happy and silly and the quote-unquote good stories, the positive stories, then you can't appreciate them entirely. If there's no conflict, you can't appreciate how happy the ending is, because they didn't work for it. Exactly, if you want to appreciate the rainbow, you have to put up with the rain, and I expressed this sentiment to Bartholomew, and he sighed and he went, "Very well. If you would like to hear the story from this creature yourself, then you shall have it. But I don't think you'll like it." I said it doesn't matter, because every story's worth telling. And he sighed when he realized that there was no convincing me otherwise, that I wanted to hear this story and I was going to hear this story, whether I had his approval or not. And he sighed and he went, this creature well, I'll tell you straight up, this deer. His antlers can't return. He has a sour outlook on life now, and he doesn't like to be around anyone. He will try and chase you off. And I shrugged, because I'd had various creatures and beings try and get rid of me, but I have a few tricks up my sleeve. I don't come unprepared. What sort of storyteller would come unprepared? Invisible disability means that, like, it's not one that you can see just by looking at me. Also, welcome, Free Jerome. I'm telling a story. We're having story time tonight. So back into it. So, I, as a storyteller, and in all of the worlds that I've traveled to and that sort of thing, I've got a few tips and tricks, when it comes to getting stories. And at this particular time I had plenty, so I didn't have any worries. I had no fear or anything like that about what to do. So he pointed me in the right direction, and I set off on my way. And I was sent deeper and deeper into the woods. The trees around got thicker. The animals that I would see scurrying past along the edges or anything like that were fewer and fewer. Until I reached a point where it was almost pitch black. The trees were so thick, the canopy above blocking almost all of the sunlight. And in the distance, there was just this huff. And like, it's you could hear it was like an echo, but the just breathing, just... It was a little unsettling. I'd seen a lot and I knew a lot, but it's still unsettling. And I quietly, for I understood that it echoed, called out and I said, "Hello? I am Storyteller. I travel from world to world and learn stories and pass them on to people who need them. I've come to hear your story." And the breathing paused. Just went, I don't mean harm. I just would like to hear your story. I think the story that you have to tell is one that many might need to hear. And there was another pause, and I was kind of worried that whatever was making that noise, I've been told a deer, but maybe I wasn't talking to a deer at the moment. I was scared that they'd run off. That's when there was a couple leaves that crunched, and they got closer, and well, there was no clearing. There was a small area just ahead that was treeless, although the canopy over top was still dense and thick. Very little sunlight came in, and this tall, big, dare I say scary, deer walked through. It had just like the hint of a horn on one side, where it was clear that it was snapped off, that it broke. And the eyes were dark. They looked black, but I don't know if they were actually black. But they were definitely not nice. Nope, that's the wrong one. There we go. The fur was dark, and even with the lack of sunlight, it wasn't a nice soft brown like you would see on many deers. It was a dark and it almost gave, where the sunlight did come through, where it hit the fur, it didn't shine like blood, but it gave that color of that dark brown red. Almost as if that was the color of this deer's fur. And the deer walked up to me and it towered above. I myself am 5'11", but this deer stood above me and looked down and huffed in my face and I stood firm. I didn't cower, but I didn't puff myself up to look intimidating or scary. I said, I just want to hear your story. Please. And And the deer laid down. Still was, even laying down with its head up, it was the same height as me. And I asked, "What is your name?" And it looked me up and down, and I sat down, because I didn't... He was big, and they were intimidating for sure, and almost scary, but there was no malice, no harm, no... They had a very just, like, accepting feel to them. Almost like there was this air about them that was just done. Like they didn't care. But they did still care. That much was obvious, but it was just that attitude of just... And so I sat down and leaned against a tree and I said, "What is your name?" "My name is unimportant. It's been lost in time. I am older than any of the other deer. I'm cursed. I'm stuck. And I can't do anything about it. And I could let others do things about it, but... Well, I'm both the reason that the war is still happening and the reason it can never end. And I looked confused as he paused and thought of his words carefully. And he looked almost ashamed. That is not the right song. Hold on, I'm so sorry. I'm trying to do cool songs with this too, and it's not working well. Nope, hold on. Where did the song go? That works. Okay. And they looked almost ashamed of the fact that of what they just said. They were, and I was confused, like, how can you be the reason that the war is still happening? How is that possible? How is that? I don't know, it was confusing to say the least. And I took a moment to try and figure out what he said, and and he said, "How are you the reason the war's still happening?" And they sighed and and just looked me over again, which I think is quite interesting because I was just sitting and they said, Some call me the spirit of the war. This world wasn't always filled with war. This world was peaceful once upon a time. Actually, it was the place to be. It was the place to be for the longest time. People would travel across space and time and dimensions to come to this world. It was beautiful. You've been to the pond, have you not? And I nodded because, yeah, I met Bartholomew. And he nodded at that. I miss Bartholomew. You know, Bartholomew wasn't always a fish. He was... he is, I guess, in a weird and complicated way. My brother. He is the spirit of life, of care. He takes care of these woods. You know, it's interesting. I haven't spoken to him in so long. So long. And for a few minutes he was off in his head. And it was clear I wasn't going to interrupt him. He was going through some memory. He was thinking about his past. I don't know for sure. I can't say for sure, but I let him sit there and I let him think and go through whatever he needed to. But when he came back, he sighed and he said, as I was saying, this world was the place to be. That pond, the area of that pond is all that's left. But that was how the entire world was. When you stepped into the atmosphere, when your feet touched the ground, when you exited a house, when you entered a building, anything, it was as if that particular place was giving you a hug. Everywhere that you stepped had the freshest smells and would invade your nostrils and just be whatever you like to smell. I really liked, we didn't really cut grass here, but, fresh cut grass, I think, is how you'd refer to it. You liked the smell. And I was quite confused because he wasn't wrong. But how did he know that? You know? It was confusing, and I didn't really understand, but I don't think my point as a storyteller is always to understand stories, but to pass them on, to tell them to others, to... I don't know. But I listened, because the story that he was telling was so important to him. And you could tell it by the tone on his voice, by the way that he paused so much to make sure that he was saying the right word. There was something about this story that meant the world to him. And he continued and he said, well, siblings fight. And Bartholomew and I were no exception. You know, at first it was just bickering, you know? I don't remember how we grew up, where we grew up, but we grew up somewhere, some way. And I don't remember us ever fighting until the bickering started. We wanted to change things. We wanted to make the world even better. But we didn't know how. And Bartholomew had one idea and I had another, and what those ideas were isn't important anymore. What is important is the fact that we fought over it. Because when we fought, those around us fought. We are a part of this world. We are a part of the magic in this world. And we didn't realize it. It took us years to realize. But we controlled things. And so when we fought, the world fought. And one day we got into a really bad argument. And once again, what it was about doesn't matter. But I shoved him. And he shoved me, and we started physically fighting. We had never gotten physical before, but we tussled, and I told you that he was once a deer like I, and we both had giant antlers, and we fought, and mine snapped, and he turned his head away at that. He didn't want me to see where the little part of his antlers still stood. And he took a deep breath, and he once again was back in his mind for a few minutes, and I didn't get any more of the story for a while. He was just lost in thought, and I let him. Because when you revisit stories, especially ones so important to you,
sometimes you need to just think about it. You need to remember it so that you tell it correctly. And I knew that he wanted to tell this story correctly, so I was going to let him. And so he was telling his story, and he was lost in his thought, and when he came back, he sighed. And he said, "When my antler snapped, when it snapped and it fell, we both froze. We stood there and stared at each other, and the horror that was on both of our faces at what we had done. But it was too late. We looked around and everyone around us was fighting. Towns were in flame. People were running, screaming. The world had broken into war just as we had. And we tried to stop it, but you can't just take it back. Once you've said something, once you've done something, you can't take it back. You can apologize, you can try and make up for it, but you can never take it back. You can never undo it once you've done it. And we transformed in that moment. In the moment of shock and horror, as we were looking around, Bartholomew turned from a deer to a fish. And the pond that he's in is in the spot where we stood, where we fought. And the trees seemed to grow in an instant around him. And the animals were innocent. And they fled to the woods to protect themselves and their families. And the ones you refer to as humans, their war had already broken out. They were already fighting, and they were done listening to the gods. They had their war. They had their purpose. They had their, I don't know, whatever it is that they want when they fight. They had it, and they continued to fight. We weren't going to stop them. There was nothing we could do to stop them. Because as I said, they weren't going to listen to the gods anymore. And he kind of gave a little snort and a chuckle, and he said, "And we were frozen in time that moment. Bartholomew and I, once we transformed and, well, he transformed into a fish. I think on some cruel planet, whatever power is higher than us, he turned into something that I could easily get rid of, something I could easily hurt, but I didn't want to. But it's I think, he thinks, we think, I don't know. I think it is, no, we know. The way to stop the war is for me to get my revenge. One of us needs to win over the other, and as a fish, Bartholomew can do nothing. He can't do anything to me. The only way for us to end the war is by us finishing our battle. And I won't do it. So the war continues. Because I can't take back my actions, and Bartholomew can't take back his." And he sighed. And he said, "That's my story. I'm stuck." And I sat there. And I thought for a long moment about what he said. About everything that he had just said to me. And I realized something. I realized that he had always known a fight there. Like, he knew peace, and then he knew how to fight. Like he said, he admitted himself he hadn't had conflict before. He doesn't remember anything before coming to this world. And I looked up at him, and I said, have you tried apologizing? Have you tried ending the war that way? By apologizing and realizing and accepting the fact that you guys fought, that things happened, by apologizing and forgiving. Because it's clear that you still care about Bartholomew, that he is still your brother and you care about him. But he doesn't seem to think that you care about him. At least that was the understanding I got. And he looked confused. Like it was a new thought he'd never thought of. And I stood. And even though he was a deer, and there was no way I could help him stand up, I offered him a hand to help him stand. And he did stand. And we went back to the pond together. And he didn't say anything. But he just laid down next to the pond. And laid his head in the water, or like touching the water. Bartholomew came up and didn't say anything, but just kind of sat next to him in the pond. And neither of them spoke a word. But as they sat there, the air around them began to swirl. And the trees began to sway, and the leaves began to fall and join in this cyclone almost of energy. And it grew, and around me the air blew, and it was nothing more than a light breeze to me. But it was bigger, it was more powerful, and it went out, and it expanded, and it seemed to cover the entire world, and for a moment the world was covered in leaves and wind spinning around, and the center was around these two. And when it stopped and the leaves settled, the trees were gone. The pond was gone. And there lay two deer next to each other. Their heads intertwined like a hug. And the sound of swords clashing stopped. And then I left that world because I didn't need to do anything else there. I had the story. The end! Welcome back. How did you like it? Like I said, I really, really liked it. I thought it was a really interesting take on it. So you can see how I was talking about like world building, the storyteller's journey. That's going to be a little series in itself within the storytelling series. And it's just going to be, as I, the storyteller, visit different worlds, the stories that I hear, how I interact with the different people, that sort of thing. Because I really want to play with this for actually a different idea that I've been toying with for like a year now that I haven't been able to do and genuinely can't do for a while. So this is a way for me to dip my toes into that sort of vibe that I want to go for this other project and things like that, all the while giving you guys some really fun content. So I hope that you enjoy. I know I had a wonderful time, and I will see you guys at the next story time. Goodbye!